Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Whitney Farmer and I'm your instructor for Grace TOEFL's the TOEFL test prep offered to you by Grace organization. I'm glad to have you back today, and what we're going to be doing today is getting into the reading section. We've dealt with a couple of other sections before, and now we're going to be starting to get an overview of the reading section. Before I get actually into the content of the test prep, though, I want to discuss with you reading in general. As you know, as I've told you before, my language acquisition started with French, but before French, I wanted to learn Spanish. I ended up choosing a different route because of the accent. I was able to do a French accent more easily than I could a Spanish accent, but I loved Spanish authors. When I was in high school, my father, who has since passed away last year, he was a terrific reader. He would just devour books from many different countries and many different histories and different types of books, different types of disciplines. Well, when I was in high school, my father introduced me to some authors who were famous in the Spanish language internationally, and because of them, I wanted to learn Spanish. The first one was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature for 100 Years of Solitude, if I remember right. And I loved that book. I also loved his Love in the Time of Cholera. With his writing, the first paragraph of his writing for me was completely captivating. I remember in 100 Years of Solitude, it started out where a man is standing in front of a firing squad and he's preparing to encounter his own death. And as he closes his eyes, preparing for his execution, his thoughts remember back to the time when he was a young boy in a town somewhere in South America. And in that town, they had never encountered ice. And there was a traveling circus or a carnival of some kind that came to town. And that was the first time that this young man had felt, touched, known what ice was. Because this carnival, they brought a block of ice with them. And if I remember right in the book, someone in the town sold everything they had to acquire this block of ice, only to have the ice melt. And so their entire fortune for a moment allowed them to acquire this wonder, but then it evaporated, it disappeared. But that to me was the first I encountered with a Latin American author of renown, and it was that introduction was provided to me by my father. The next author that I encountered was Pablo Neruda. Pablo Neruda, I believe, if I remember right, was the Chilean ambassador to France. And he wrote a number of different types of poetry. But my father introduced me to him with a book called Los Versos del Capitán, the Captain's Verses. And I was a teenager, and the book was all love poetry, romantic poetry. And so for my teenage girl mind, it was enthralling, absolutely enthralling. And the way the book is one half of the page, the left side, was in Spanish, as he had originally written his poetry. And on the right hand of the page was in English. So I was able to do a side-by-side translation, and I was able to acquire some words in Spanish, and I was so excited about it. I remember one poem, it was called Wind on the Island, and the first part of it was, the wind is a horse, and in Spanish it was, el viento es un caballo. And I was so glad that I could know that. I mean, at the end of the poem, I remember just, as a teenage girl, just not being able to get it out of my mind, and it was something about, with your brow on my brow, with your mouth on my mouth, are tied to the love that consumes us. Let the wind pass and not take me away. Let the waves crash, rush with foam, while I sunk beneath your big eyes just for this night. shall rest, my love. And I was just, oh, I was romantic. And so that poetry appealed to that emotional part of myself, and it allowed me to enter into an intellectual development. I ended up leaving behind Spanish for the moment because I was able to do the French accent more easily. And I was frustrated because in my ear I could hear I wasn't pronouncing the Spanish R's accurately. When you trill the R, it's further back on your tongue. And I can only do it towards the front, and that bothered me. And I could hear it, so instead I went to French because I could do the French sounds better. But anyway, the long way to say is reading is foundational. And there are so many different types of language students. And I'm not sure where you're at, where you're coming from. But there's some types of intellectual development for some people comes through their ears. Some, they need to have the sentient movement of their mouth forming sounds. And that is what captivates them. And that's what captures their attention and allows them to be pulled into the educational moment instead of pushed into it. It becomes much more natural. They're able to enter into a flow of concentration. For me, as from the moment I could read, reading has been that that lure for me into intellectual development. My eyesight is terrible because I have read so many books in bad lighting, and it's true that eventually it's going to hurt your eyesight, and that did to mine, but I wouldn't give that up for anything, because reading has opened up so many wonderful doors to me, so many wonderful doors. And it was the way I first began to learn language. And when I started reading French or Spanish, but French in the native tongue, at first it is a complete mystery. But then as I would start to learn and translate it, and I would speak the words as I would be reading it, it would be as if I was uncovering a secret game. And I would hear and I would suddenly understand. And so it became, again, enthralling for me, very stimulating intellectually. And so it pulled me into acquiring the language instead of pushing me. I want you to have that experience with English. And I know that you're in a intense, sometimes desperate situation where you're at. You need to get over this hurdle of the TOEFL to either get into university or to acquire reciprocal professional certification. But I want to help facilitate that by hopefully reminding you what it was like to learn at one time in your life when you were younger, because that neurological pattern, that emotional connection is probably still there. And if we can ignite that again or be reminded of it again, then that might be an additional tool for you to be able to help you succeed, not just at getting the scores you need on this test, but at the next phase in your life. Again, we're at this bridge time, and I want to hopefully transition you into the place that you're dreaming of, your vision. So, that being said, reading is foundational to the language acquisition. Some people hear things auditorily and it's the voice or the sound that pulls them in. But if we understand the reading, then you also, you have the ability to not just read but then write. And English can be very phonetic. So if you look at the symbols of the alphabet in the words that are used, you can sound them out, and that can help you acquire rapidly. So the reading portion of it, like I said, I'd like to remind myself of the importance of reading. And hopefully for you, you can get back into that flow of concentration. All right, so prefacing that. Now, the reading section. What I'd like to do today is simply give you an overview, okay? The reading section has a number of different types of questions. Next. Before we begin that, I want to remind you of a couple of different strategies, of just general strategies on how to take this test. So, next. As you're doing this test, it's not just being perfect in English, because none of us are, even native-born speakers. We want to become familiar with how to take this particular test, how it is constructed, so that you're not frozen in a moment of confusion simply because of how it's put together that keeps you from displaying the true nature of what you've acquired in your development. All right, so you need to be familiar with the directions. You need to understand what the page looks like when you click to it or when you open it up. That will help you, simply being familiar with the directions, just like a road map when you enter into a new city and you become familiar with the grid and things east, west, north, south, landmarks, etc. Same thing will help you score well on this test. Also, don't spend, this sounds counterintuitive, but don't spend too much time reading the passages. The reason is that you have a lot of different content to get through, and if you delve too deeply into the passages, sometimes that can eat your time in a way that's non-productive. You need to be in a performance mode rather than a simple flow mode in this test. And you're going to be receiving content oftentimes that is not within your professional expertise, but it is within a higher education context. So when you encounter this information, reading the first word all the way unto the last word, and then expecting to perform in that manner is probably not going to be the most effective and successful way to do so. Instead, what I'm going to be discussing in a few minutes is actually skimming. And how to skim in a successful way is something that you will use when you're in university for sure. And it also is one of the successful skill building strategies that ETS discusses on their website and on their various mediums that assist people with test preparation. So you don't want to spend too much time reading the passages. And I'll go more in detail to that on what to do in a few minutes. Next, never leave any of the answers blank. Now, some of you have taken some other kinds of tests that there was actually a weighted score that was given you for every answer that you answered accurately, or left blank, or answered inaccurately, and there was different weights given to each of them. Some tests are built that way, so it actually is an incentive for you, if you don't know an answer, to leave it blank. That's not how this test is built. This test is built so if you have a blank, then it's going to be a penalty. If you take a guess on this test, you have a 25% chance, depending on which part of it's on, a 25% chance of being successful. So the way this test is built, guess. If you don't know the answer, guess. And I'll show you also some strategies on how to guess with more success. If you can eliminate, for example, one of the answers that you know is inaccurate, you just increased your probability to about 33%. So, all right, so we'll discuss that. Additionally, don't be intimidated by the reading sample that you're going to be receiving if it is an unfamiliar topic to you. Just like when you open up a newspaper or magazine article, there's oftentimes information there that is not within your realm of expertise. That probably will be something you encounter in this test. I don't know if you have had an opportunity, and if you haven't, please do. But if you go onto ETS's official videos, website, etc., they oftentimes, in all of their reading samples currently, in the content the media content they've provided, discuss a meteor strike and different archaeological or different geologic periods in the Earth's development and the effect of the strike on different strata analysis and extinction events with dinosaurs and then opportunistic moments for other species. So there's not many paleontologists. There's not a run in the market for paleontologists. So you might not be one of those where that would be something that would be piece of cake for you. It might be completely new information. And this test is built in such a way that even if it's not in the realm of your expertise, you should be able to identify the correct answers regardless. And again, the reason is the way that it's built. There is a difference between academic vocabulary, which everyone in higher education should be expected to use, or profession-specific, industry-specific vocabulary. For example, in medicine or engineering, etc., there will be a different specific vocabulary that you will be privy to when you talk amongst your colleagues that would be different than if you're in a higher education or a general professional environment. Okay, and this test is built to test academic vocabulary, not industry specific. Okay? Lastly, for this first part of general strategies and recommendations, you might have time left when you finish a section, and if you do, terrific. Use that time to recheck your answers, to reread in more depth if you'd like the reading samples that are given, and then just confirm that you're comfortable with your answers. Now, I will say, some parts of this test, the ones that have the multiple choice, you want to be careful if you decide to change your answer. And if you clearly have the wrong answer, then of course change it. But statistically, the first answer you put, unless you simply made a mistake, statistically the first answer you put is more likely the accurate one. So just to let you know, the way this is built, this is one of those test-taking strategies to ponder, and I can go over on which part of the test that would apply to. So, all right, now, next please. This portion of the test, the reading section, has different types of questions embedded in it. And you need to be familiar with how these questions are built so that you will know how to respond. I guess some people still are taking the test in a paper format. If you're in that situation, there are accommodations that are made. You might not have as ready access to testing dates and locations though. So I would encourage everyone to get to a location if possible where you can take this in an internet-based format, the IBT format. And the reason is it's going to expedite your process in terms of your sitting for the test, the accumulation of the results back, the reporting back, etc. A number of other countries too, some countries in terms of infrastructure development, they just skipped a couple of steps. They didn't even go to telephones. They went straight from no phones to sophisticated mobile infrastructure or laying down high-speed internet lines. So anyway, try to find a way to take this electronically if you can. And the reason is that some of these tests, they are built in a way electronically that you need to be familiar with, and it'll help you in terms of your scores. All right? So, quickly, there are different types of questions in the reading section. The first one is simple vocabulary. We also have sentence simplification questions. There are inference or rhetorical purpose questions. There'll be one or the other of those in this test. There'll be factual information and negative factual information, meaning you'll read a sample and it will say what was said in this sample or what was not said in this sample. You have to read the question carefully because it'll be one or the other, but they're structured the same way in that part. And there's also a prose summary and a fill in the table type of question. And those ones are, there's a very, I'm not going to say it's peculiar, but there's a very specific interface on how those look on a screen on a computer and how you interact with them that I want you to be familiar with before you actually go and sit down for that test. One of the things I'm going to give you later on in our conversation today is your homework assignment. And your homework assignment is for you to take a practice test. And if you can do it in an internet-based format, wonderful, because I want you to become familiar, because part of this, answering these, is doing a drag and a click to be able to capture your responses. And in this, the prose summary and fill in the table types of questions, it's more complex. And so I don't want you to be thrown for a loop, as we say in English, idiom, which means that you're confused and not at your best and you're off balance, all right? So I want you to be familiar with that format so you can drag, click, boom, score, right? Also, the insert text types of questions are as well. Those also are a drag and click type of question. All right, so those are the kinds that you'll find in the reading section, and there'll be different mixes of them, and there's different scoring connected to each of them. Now what I've done is, and again, this presentation today, I'll be posting this on our WhatsApp as well as our Facebook group, so you can see the slides. I got examples off of ETS's official test preparation materials to show you what they look like so that you'll be familiar with the format, so that again you'll be able to perform well. So to begin, the vocabulary. All right, vocabulary is going to be, okay, this one here that you'll probably see on your screen says the word pose is closest in meaning to, and then you have 4 different options. To the side of it, there is a reading sample. This one here is, there is increasing evidence that the impacts of meteorites have had important effects on Earth, particularly in the field of biological evolution. Such impacts continue to pose a natural hazard to life on Earth. Again, there's a lot of conversation about meteors and dinosaurs, etc., in all of the test prep materials that are currently out there from ETS officially. So you might not be a paleontologist, but you can still perform well on the test. All right. So now what happens is the word pose is highlighted both in terms of the question that's given to you or posed to you, and then also in this writing sample. And then what you are to do is you're supposed to click on which one is the closest in meaning in the context of the sample that's given. Now this is where I want you to know, under any circumstances, do not leave it blank. If you don't understand what it is, this is definitely where you need to take a guess. Because even if you have no idea what pose means, you have a 25% chance of getting a score if you just blindly do one of these, all right? If you can eliminate only one of the potential choices, you've increased your opportunity to 33.33%, yeah? If you can still not know the answer, but if you can eliminate 2 for sure, you have a 50-50 chance of scoring, all right? So definitely take that risk if you don't know what to do on this. So, but basically what you do is you mark what is the closest similar word to within the context of the definition of what's being used here. So, which it asks the meaning of the word pose. So, you know, that's pretty simple. And it's interesting. It's simple for me, I guess, because I speak English. Not simple for you when you're learning English. And I will tell you, as a person who likes to assist with education, I did notice that on a number of the strategies given on a number of different resources, including ETS, the strategy they give to succeed, for example, in this type of question on this section is, learn English. Build your vocabulary. Well, yes, of course. I mean, you know, as I've said from the beginning, we're not going to save you from the need to learn English, because this test is a high-stakes test, and it's meant to forecast your probability of success in the future, either in profession or higher education. So if the test could be beat without actually acquiring English, then you would be facing significant tuition costs or relocation costs, etc., perhaps for naught, because what would occur is you'd make these changes, you wouldn't perform successfully, and you'd be out a lot of money or, you know, time and effort, etc. So The idea is not to beat it. So yes, the way to win on this type of question is to know the vocabulary to test it. There are some different resources of most commonly used vocabulary, and in future classes we can go into some different resources to help you acquire higher education vocabulary as opposed to professional, which will help you with this. But also additionally, I would say too, that a number of different words have a Latin or a Greek root to them in English. And if you are involved in any of the sciences or STEM, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics in your academic past, regardless of what country of origin you're native to, those root languages can be used to help unpack the meaning of current languages. On one of ETS's sites, it talks about terrestrial debris, meaning distinguishing once a meteorite hits, the difference between the meteorite content and what happened on Earth with the impact which caused this debris to go into the atmosphere, which then settled down and created striations throughout, globally. So terrestrial in that sense. They said if you know in Latin the word terra means earth, then if you didn't know the word terrestrial, or if you weren't a fan of science fiction or Star Trek or what have you, then if you didn't know the word terrestrial, you could probably deduce what is the meaning of it because of the root of terra, which is Latin, embedded in that word. And you'll find that in English. A number of the words that we have actually are cultures. So you might not have initially known the word, and yet you might be able to deduce what it is based upon your past experiences. For example, sheriff in English. Sheriff is a type of a domestic law enforcement officer. And if you come from an Arabic background, sharif, it's the same word. And so if you saw the word sheriff in English, maybe not knowing what it was, you might be able to deduce accurately what is the meaning of it, because English has borrowed. America is a country of immigrants, and so our current language, which the British would say we don't actually speak English, they would say we speak American English. Our language has embedded in it borrowed words from many different countries, as a reminder. Okay? Next, please. Another type of sentence that you will get is called a sentence simplification example. And the reason this kind of a question is embedded in the test is they want to determine if you're able to read and glean or get the gist of what is the information that is necessary in that article, as opposed to extraneous or unnecessary information. Things that are usually unnecessary in terms of information is content that is included in parentheses, or dates or numbers of numerals. Usually those are not absolutely necessary in terms of the gist of the information. Like, for example, say, in America, July the 4th, 1776 is considered, when Declaration of Independence is considered, when we declared that we're independent. In that, July 4th and 1776 are not really the most important concept. The most important concept is that in America, we declared that we were independent in the past. And so now, from that moment, we have a different form of government, right? So that the dates sometimes are important. The information in parentheses is sometimes important. Examples are sometimes important, but usually that information is given to promote the key essential content. And in this type of question, your job is to make a distinction between what is essential and what is non-essential or supportive of the initial concept. Okay? So in this, for example, it says the explosion is also calculated to produce vast quantities of nitric acid and melted rock that sprayed out over much of the earth, starting widespread fires that must have consumed most terrestrial forests and grassland. From that, then, you're supposed to find out what is a more simpler way of conveying this information. And if you look at the different choices, there are some subtle differences that will help identify whether you actually comprehend what you just read. For example, the first one says scientists believe that large amounts of nitric acid and melted rock were released by the explosion, causing fires that probably destroyed most of the Earth's plant life. Okay. Also, fires spread out over the Earth, burning many forests and releasing nitric acid and other materials into the atmosphere. Scientists have calculated the amount of nitric acid and melted rock that was released on Earth after the explosion. So each of those is subtly different. So you have to figure out which one is closest to simplifying the core content of what was the initial sentence. For example, scientists have calculated the amount of nitric acid and melted rock that was released on Earth after the explosion. Well, I'm sure they have, but that's not really the core of what was being discussed on this, right? So you need to determine what is essential and what is only supportive of the essential concept. That's your job on sentence simplification questions. Okay? Next, please. This is getting to be more complex in terms of content, but also the initial strategy which I described to you with the vocabulary, where if you can take a guess and eliminate one or two of the unknowns, then you have a stronger probability of success. This is also built that same way. So on questions, you can do the same thing. How will you spot an inference question? If you look on the left part of the screen on the very top, it says, which of the following can be inferred from paragraph 3 about the location of the meteorite impact in Mexico? Okay. Literally, this example says inferred. So because it says it's inferred, then you know it's going to be an inference type of question. Other keywords you can look for would be what can be suggested from paragraph 3 or proposed. So there is a sense the word inferred might be used, or inference might be inferred, assumption or assumed, suggested. Those are words that are going to be key words to understand that this is going to be that type of question. And again, if you notice here, if you read the right-hand side, what is inferred, what is the suggestion, what is assumed by that content is, on this one, the correct answer is C. And there are subtle differences between the other choices that if you read in depth, you'll be able to determine. But if you do have confusion, again, this is one of those you need to guess on. But C is the correct answer for this example. Okay, next please. This is a similar type of the inference and the rhetorical purpose are very similar in how they're built. So this one, for example, says in paragraph 2, why does the author include the information that dinosaurs had flourished, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the question why is going to be an earmark to you, a landmark for you to know that this is going to be a rhetorical purpose question. And if you notice, embedded in the answers here, again, the answer on this one is C, the answers are not complete sentences because you're answering the question why. And it is starting with a capital T, but you'll notice that none of the answers have a period at the end of it. And that is accurate because there is not a subject, verb, predicate. There is a missing portion. These are simply clauses. And so they're not complete sentences, so you're right. There's no period at the end of those if you notice grammatically. So this is written grammatically accurate. So what you're finding on this one, you're going to be answering the question why. And that is the rhetorical. What is the purpose of this? All right? That's the type of question that's going to be. Okay? Next, please. Now, this one is going to be, there's factual information examples, And there's also a negative factual information example. So you need to read very carefully. They're built exactly the same way, but be careful that you're finding out whether they want to know what exactly the article or the sample is saying or as written, or in this example, I wanted you to see what is it not saying. What is it not saying? And the key to this, on this, for example, the question that's listed on the very top of the left-hand side of your page says, according to paragraph 4, the following statements are true of the impact of the end of the Cretaceous period, except. When you see the word except, you know that you're going to be picking out something that is actually not one of the suggested conclusions or the information that's given on the right-hand side. So of the 4 choices, 3 of them are going to be there, all right? Now this is where skimming can actually help you. For example, if I said, okay, so I need to find a large amount of dust blocks sunlight from the earth. And if I go to the side, such a quantity of material would have blocked the sunlight. Okay, so that one is not the answer. Okay, so instead of having to read the entire paragraph, because I was able to scan and find that one portion dealing with the amount of dust that blocked the sunlight coming from the earth, I know that that one's not my answer, so I can eliminate it. So I haven't had to read all the content. Next one, the earth became cold and dark for several months. Again, scanning, plunging the earth into a period of cold and darkness. Okay, I know that's also not the one. Not even having read the entire sample, saving time. So I'm going to also eliminate that one from choice. New elements were formed in the Earth's crust. Looking through, I don't see that. That might be my answer, but let me check to D. Again, scanning quickly to be able to save time and hopefully get what I need to get. Large quantities of nitric acid were produced. Going through. Explosion also calculated to have produced vast quantities of vast quantities of nitric acid were produced. So that's also eliminated because that is referred to in the article, which means it's not the exception on the left-hand side. That can be really confusing. Make sure that if it's a negative factual content, that you pick out what is not included. And this is one of those things, actually, if you're a well-read person, you might not even need to read so much of the article on the side, because this information might be old hat to you, that dust blocks sunlight coming to the earth, and as a result the earth was plunged into darkness for a number of months, and as a result of all the different types of things that occurred, nitric acid was produced, which also created, acid rain, etc., whatever. So even without reading the article, if I knew just that kind of information, because when I was a kid I was really into dinosaurs and I read about this, I would probably be able to answer this even without having read the article. So this type of question is where skimming will help you out quite a bit. All right? Now to skim, how you skim is not just going to help you on the TOEFL. It will help you throughout your higher academic career, or also if you're trying to stay current in your professional journals. The way you skim, and I'm not breaking any rules by saying this, this is actually what ETS says in their test prep materials, but to skim, what you do is you're playing upon how English is written in an academic setting. And a few lessons ago we discussed a thesis type of a format, or a journalistic type of a format, how things are put together. In that, in a sample, the first paragraph and the last paragraph are the most essential. The first paragraph introduces the idea. The middle paragraphs give information or examples to support that. And the last paragraph concludes and bookmarks it, puts it all together. So if you're skimming, what you can do, if you have a reading sample that has multiple paragraphs, read the first paragraph fully. Read the first line, or the first sentence only, rather, the first sentence only from the body paragraphs. Like if there's 3 different paragraphs in the body, read the first sentence from each. And then read the last paragraph fully. So first paragraph in its entirety. First sentence from each of the body supporting paragraphs, and then the last paragraph in its entirety. So if you're short on time and in textbooks, this is what I would do in school as well. I would do that, and then I would read everything that was highlighted. I would read the summary. I would read the end of the chapter notes to get through content quickly, to be able to devour information so I could take those tests in college. And then when I had an opportunity, I could go in more depth. And after this structure of data, my brain was anticipating that this is what we were talking about. And so as the data came in, it was more organized. As I read more in depth, my brain would know how to organize it because I'd quickly built a structure by skimming. And that's what you're doing in terms of a mnemonic device, is when you skim, you're letting your brain anticipate what it's going to be receiving. So then, as you do read, the information isn't just going to bounce off. When it arrives, your brain will know how to organize it, and so therefore you can recall it. Okay? So, next please. Now, that one, perfect. This is where I can't emphasize enough. I'd like to encourage you to practice these in an internet-based format, because the prose summary and fill in the table types of questions, they are dependent on being comfortable with an electronic interface instead of just the paper. All right, it's really, I want to strongly encourage you to practice these in an internet-based format instead of on paper. And then when you actually sit for the test, when it's administered, you'll be familiar with this type of format. What happens is, I mean, it's a simple concept. What you're doing with prose summary is you're supposed to drag your choices to the spaces where they belong. So like we were talking about a thesis development, you've got a main idea, then you've got supporting paragraphs, then you have your closing conclusion, which is the way you develop a thesis in an academic environment, whether it's one paragraph, one page, or whether it's a PhD thesis, multiple pages, published over many years, whatever, all right? Same format applies. And that's what this is asking you to do. Basically put these in sequential order. And this has really nothing to do with English per se. This is a language skill. So whatever language is your mother tongue, this type of intellectual organization is what's being tested here. Now, of course, you need to know English to be able to understand what's being said so you can put them in the right order. But this is has a different skill set that it's addressing. It really wants to get to, can you organize your thoughts in a scholarly manner? So what you do is you've got these statements, and you need to put them in order. The opening statement, supporting, and then the concluding. And how you're going to do it is you're going to be clicking and dragging the paragraphs into the right order, okay? Now, with this, you have a total point opportunity of 2 points, and yet you have 3 clicks you need to do. Now, what that means is they're not equally weighted. If you get all 3 in the right order, you will receive 2 points to your favor. If you get only 2 of the paragraphs or the sentences, the phrases, in the correct order, you'll only get 1 point. And unfortunately, if you only get 1 of the phrases or sentences or paragraphs in the right order, you will get 0 points. So that's the way it breaks down. So I want you to become familiar with, on this administration, dragging, clicking, dragging, clicking. There's a lot of people who are brilliant English speakers, but the electronic computer environment is uncomfortable for them. And I don't want it to be uncomfortable for you to the point that it interferes with displaying the skills that you've got, all right? So that's how the prose summary works, but also similar to this is the fill in the table type of question. What happens with that is there is a section where you've got a number of different items, and you need to separate them into either 2 or 3 different distinctions. One of them that was given as a choice that I saw and as an example was, I think, creators and users or something, and so you would just, separate this to here, this to here, but the way you do it is the same as with the prose summary. You need to drag and click to distinguish. So again, please do practice those types in an environment, whether it's on the TOEFL mobile app or on your computer, on their website. Again, there are free resources that you can utilize to make you comfortable with this type of interface. All right? Next, please. I think this is actually the last type of, this is the last type of question that I'm going to address today. And I know I'm going through a lot of information, and this is, we only have an hour today, but we can talk in more depth and give more examples in future, but I wanted to give you an overview of the reading section so you know what's going to hit you. And then we can practice and become more familiar with how this all works. But I wanted to give you, again, an overview, brief information that will help you form a structural framework so that as the skills develop, you can put them in the right spot, all right? All right, another type of, the last type that I wanted to discuss, a question that is included on this, is called an insert text. And the way this works, again, this is going to be a computer interface. There's going to be 4 squares on one side of the paper, or one side of the screen rather. And then you have a sentence or a phrase or a paragraph that's going to be highlighted, as you can see on your screen in terms of the example. That phrase goes somewhere logically in the body of the sample that's included on the right. Now, if you're going to be a scholar or if you're going to be in a profession, you need to show, again, that logical progression, the thesis type of development, where you begin with a broad concept, you provide supporting information, and then you have a conclusion. And you need to do it in a way that's workmanlike manner. All right, a skill set needs to be displayed. What you're going to be doing on this is you're going to show where this phrase should be included to make sense in terms of that type of intellectual development. All right, and there'll be some kinds of key words that you might see, like it might say this or that, like for this reason. And if it says for this reason, you'll know that before that a reason was given of some sort. So your pronouns in this section are going to be really critical. So if you search for pronouns that are going to be the key that'll help you know where to go, then that can be a skill building tip for you. All right. So this, though, again, is going to be something that you really want to have done within an electronic environment. Again, I really emphasize that. I want to have you be comfortable with that type of test administration. Okay? Now, so I want to give you some more specific test preparation skill building tips that are provided directly from ETS. Again, GRACE, we are a nonprofit organization that we're coming alongside because of many questions within our community. People wanted to have this kind of assistance, this kind of education, so they could succeed in this. There are many different tests that people will take. TOEFL is one of them. And so this class addresses TOEFL. We don't work for TOEFL. We don't have any financial compensation connected in any way at all to what we're doing here. We are simply here because we want to help. We have been helped in the past, and so we are helping in return. The reason I'm going through what ETS wants you to know on how to build your skills is because they own the test. They built the test. They know this test. And so therefore, if they provide recommendations, I think it's prudent of us to pay attention. All right? So, first thing they say when you're going through the reading section on their preparation, they say, you need to know that academic vocabulary is not professional vocabulary. Academic vocabulary is a higher level vocabulary that should be expected in an academic environment, but it's not industry specific. So regardless of your background, it's going to be a higher level of acquisition in your language skills. But every industry, every professional should be able to utilize those words, which I just did as an example. Instead of saying use or speak those words, I used a higher level word, utilize, all right? So regardless of the profession, the word utilize is a higher level vocabulary choice than use, but all professions can use it, can utilize it, all right? So next, look for Latin roots, as they said. The Latin roots in many of the words where you're coming from, especially if you're in the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, you might have a good foundation already of Latin in what you're doing. So that can help you with breaking down English words like terrestrial, as the example that was given, to understand what is the meaning behind the word that was chosen, all right? Next, outlining the main points, giving less attention to parentheses, examples, etc. This is important. When you, again, this goes back to skimming. When you're reading the content, getting caught on minutia, the small information that supports the main idea, instead of losing the thread of why this paragraph, the sample, was being given. It doesn't matter, for example, when the meteorite was actually discovered. What the content in the samples that were given in our conversation today was that this whole idea leads to a concept of there are major events that occurred in the past that were extinction moments that destroyed some species, created opportunities for others, and we currently face this challenge as a species. You know, so it's a broader concept than in 1980, this is what happened. Or in 1990, they discovered where the meteorite hit in the Yucatan Peninsula, all right? So that's information that should support the main concept, yes? So being able to be discerning, to be able to distinguish between what is essential and what is not. So when you're reading, think about it being like you're gold mining, all right? When you come upon a pile of dirt, somewhere in there is treasure, yeah? And just like a gold miner, you're to choose between what is precious and what is worthless, and to parse this way and this way and this way. And that's what you're doing in this test when you're reading this information, all right? So main points and then support. Go for the main points. Some of the support things too, they might be confusing for you because you might not have all the language skills. All the more reason to concentrate on what is the main concept and pay minimal attention to the things that are extraneous and unnecessary, non-essential, all right? Skim by reading the first paragraph entirely, the first sentence of each of the middle supporting paragraphs, and the last paragraph. Again, this goes back to a thesis format of writing. It's also a journalistic format of writing. In journalism in America, oftentimes you have in the first major paragraph, not just the intro that hooks you, but in the first content paragraph you'll have who, what, where, when, why. The 5 W's embedded in one paragraph. And if you're reading a newspaper in America, oftentimes if you read that paragraph that includes all that information, you don't need to read the article. The Wall Street Journal, for example, is designed in this way where you have all the articles embedded in the paper. On the front page of the paper, there's a column, and it contains the lead. That's what they call it, the lead. Who, what, where, when, why. One paragraph, boom, 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 boom. So if a person doesn't have time to read an entire newspaper, which is like a book that arrives every morning, you have time to read one column of the newspaper, and you need to get that information quick, just to give you a survey of the daily business. That's why that format of that newspaper is designed that way. Skimming can be beneficial to you. And then things will occur that you'll have time available to you, you'll have a need that you can dig deeper into particular content areas. But in the meantime, the skimming will give you a structural framework. And keep your notes short. Sometimes I would find this, and actually this is going to be something that benefits you in higher education too. I would find when I'm taking lecture notes, if I would try to, it's like my ears almost turn off when I'm writing. I'm one of those people. So when I would listen to a lecture with the professor, if I would take my notes if they were too extensive, I would find that I would lose the thread of the lecture. I would lose huge blocks of content because I was concerned with making sure my notes were in detail. And so what I would find myself doing actually, and this is something we're going to allude to actually for the listening section, is I would sit back and listen, and then I would write down what I just heard. And then that would actually help me capture things as they were being said. I wouldn't lose it because my attention was drawn away from my auditory into the written word instead. So if you keep your notes short, that'll keep you from getting lost. All right? Next, please. So those are ETS's recommendations. And I would just simply give you my recommendation. I think that it's important for us to be reminded of the things that caused us to be curious as children, things that caused us to be intellectually captivated, things that were the lure that brought us into whatever has been our chosen profession. We're not reading the way we used to. And there's actually neurological patterns that are changing that cause some concern. How we're skimming articles on our phones, and even how our eyes are moving, how they're going like this instead of this, and it's changing the way we're processing information, and we're capturing vast amounts that's just a pile. It's just a pile of information without a rhyme or reason. You know, it's just disaggregated. All right, it needs to be instead more organized. How we're reading has changed, and I would encourage you, as well as encourage myself, to get back to the book, to just get back to a book, and get back into books in a way that even if it's in an electronic format, but that actually causes your eyes to move in a different manner, but something that makes you read in a way that makes you lose your sense of time, that you're so concentrated, and your concentration, your flow begins to just continue into the book, and you lose a sense of time and space. And then that, again, I think that's a pleasure that we don't have as much opportunity to imbibe in our modern times. And I would like to encourage you, as well as myself, to enjoy a good book again, right? It's summertime. You should be sitting at the beach reading a good book, or relaxing in the evening in the cool of the day, and reading something that reminds us about love, or adventure, or heartache, or joy, or destiny. Yeah? So that's my recommendation. Next, please. Your homework is going to be, for the next week, I believe we're at the point now where yes, I want to encourage you, but I think we're at the point now where you need to begin to determine what are your strengths, which is where the encouragement comes in, but also where you have need for improvement. Everyone acquires in a language in a lopsided manner. Some things you're better at, some things you're less strong in. If you start to take tests, the TOEFL samples, and test yourself, you'll be able to start seeing what areas you need to improve on. So your homework is take a practice test of one of the sections, any of the sections, reading, listening, writing, whatever it is. Take a practice test of one of the sessions from any source, electronic or paper. I would like to encourage electronic eventually. If you can do it now, brilliant. If not, if you only have access to paper, that's fine, do that. Observe yourself objectively, all right? Think about how you work through that test. See where you could improve. Begin to be an analysis the analyzer of yourself. You're the test taker, but also be the test checker of yourself. So observe yourself and begin to identify your weaknesses. And then let's report those to each other. Let's be brave, as we've had some of our student colleagues also be brave in the past. Let's report those to each other on our various mediums so we can see where we can improve, okay? And then lastly, next week we shall be meeting again, and we'll be here on August the 4th, Sunday, at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So again, I am very grateful that you've given us your attention today, and I am very honored that we've had an opportunity to stand in front of you for this class. So until next time, on behalf of everyone involved in this project, I'd like to say, may peace be with you. Thank you.